The development of Silent Hill F represents a bold attempt by Konami to resurrect one of the most important psychological horror franchises in video games after a prolonged 13-year hiatus since Silent Hill Downpour in 2012. The decision to develop this new chapter came after years of fan speculation and the cultural impact that the cancelled PT Silent Hills had on the gaming community. Konami entrusted the project to the studio NeoBards Entertainment, known for Resident Evil Reverse, a choice that demonstrates the company's intention to bring a renewed perspective to the series. The development context reveals a company aware that it needed not only to meet the expectations of old fans, but also to win over a new generation of players who grew up distant from the original franchise. The most radical change in development was the conscious decision to abandon the traditional American setting and return to the Japanese roots of the series. According to the developers, Konami felt that Silent Hill had become excessively westernized, losing its original Japanese essence. This decision was not just aesthetic, but philosophical. They wanted to create a 100% Japanese horror based on the concept of finding terror in beauty, where something extremely beautiful and perfect becomes deeply disturbing. The choice to set the game in 1960s Japan in the fictional town of Ibisugaoka reflects a search for cultural authenticity that had been diluted in previous titles. This approach represents a significant course correction, acknowledging that Japanese identity has always been central to the franchise's DNA, even when the stories were set in the United States. The creative team assembled for Silent Hill F demonstrates Konami's commitment to narrative and atmospheric quality. The hiring of Ryukishi 7, the celebrated writer of Higurashi When They Cry, was a strategic move to ensure authenticity in Japanese horror. Ryukishi 7 not only brought his expertise in complex psychological narratives, but also influenced fundamental decisions such as the choice of the real town of Kanayama in Gifu as inspiration for Ebisugaoka. The return of Akira Yamaoka as composer was equally crucial, bringing back the sound identity that defined the franchise's best moments. The artist Kira was responsible for creating a visual style that moved away from the traditional rusty and blood-stained scenery, maintaining familiarity while seeking a renewed aesthetic. This combination of talents suggests a development focused on narrative and atmospheric elements, not just technical innovations. The process of creating the setting reveals an impressive dedication to authenticity. The team physically visited Kanayama to photograph locations, record ambient sounds, and study local daily life, later using these materials as a reference to faithfully recreate the atmosphere of the 1960s. Ryukishi 7 specifically chose this location due to its extremely unique urban landscape that reflected the passage of time and how structures evolved with the residents' lifestyles. This approach contrasts drastically with the typical development of modern games, where scenarios are often created in a purely imaginative way. The decision to portray a period of transition in Japan, capturing the tension between modern civilization and ancient popular beliefs, adds a layer of cultural depth rarely seen in Western horror games. Silent Hill F features impressive visuals that use cutting-edge technologies to create an authentic and immersive visual experience. The game is developed on Unreal Engine 5 and takes full advantage of the engine's capabilities, implementing lumen for dynamic global illumination and screen space reflections for realistic reflections. The 4K visual quality is remarkable, with clean textures and refined detailing that manages to capture both the nostalgic beauty and the grotesque horror of the proposal. The use of DLSS on PC allows for maintaining a fixed 4K at 60 FPS, demonstrating solid technical optimization that does not compromise visual fidelity. The implementation of these technologies results in scenarios with high-quality lighting that enhances every detail of the Japanese setting, from the textures of traditional woods to the subtle reflections in the fog that permeates the city. The visual recreation of 1960s Japan is extraordinarily authentic and detailed, representing one of the high points of the game's visual design. The city of Ebisugaoka is rendered with meticulous attention to the architectural and cultural details of the time, creating a sense of beauty and nostalgia that contrasts perfectly with the horror that unfolds. Traditional Japanese houses, dirt roads, decorative elements, and even everyday objects are reproduced with impressive historical accuracy. The initially warm and welcoming color palette of the city gradually transforms as the fog spreads, creating a visual transition that is both subtle and impactful. The vivid 4K visuals manage to convey this duality between the familiar and the menacing, establishing a solid visual foundation for the psychological horror narrative. The creature design represents a unique visual approach that combines floral elements with body horror in a disturbingly beautiful way. The creatures are composed of a mixture of floral and fleshy elements, creating a grotesque result that maintains a strange organic beauty. The enemies look like deformed dolls or mannequins, with textures that mix skin, flowers, and synthetic materials, creating a visual aesthetic that is simultaneously repulsive and fascinating. The erratic movement of these creatures is complemented by fluid animations that make each encounter visually impactful. The red spider lilies, Higanbana, that sprout from the ground add a visual layer rich in cultural symbolism, while the tentacle-like plants that come out of the walls create a dramatic visual transformation of the environment. This visual approach manages to maintain aesthetic consistency throughout the experience, creating a visually cohesive and memorable bestiary. The other world of Silent Hill F presents an impressive visual reimagination that moves away from the franchise's traditional industrial aesthetic. Instead of the characteristic metallic and rusty environment of previous games, this title presents the other world as an ancient spiritual palace inspired by ancient Japanese temples. The aesthetic deeply explores darkness, traditional architecture, and the play of shadows, creating environments that are visually distinct, but maintain the expected oppressive atmosphere. The textures of aged wood, the ornate architectural elements, and the carefully positioned lighting create a sense of decaying grandeur that perfectly serves the narrative. The visual transition between the normal world and the other world is executed with technical mastery, using particle effects and gradual lighting changes that make the transformation both visually impressive and narratively significant. Silent Hill F's combat system represents a radical and controversial change in the franchise that, in my opinion, can both reinvigorate and alienate the fanbase. The game completely abandons the series' traditional firearms, focusing exclusively on melee combat. The protagonist Hinako uses improvised objects like pipes, baseball bats, knives, and even a small rural scythe, all with a durability system that destroys them with use. Honestly, I think this decision is courageous but risky. On one hand, it forces a greater proximity to enemies, which intensifies the horror. But on the other, it can frustrate players accustomed to the versatility of traditional weapons. The combat incorporates light, heavy, and special attacks, with specials consuming sanity, creating an interesting dilemma about when to use your maximum power. The implementation of Souls-like mechanics in Silent Hill F is probably the most controversial aspect of the gameplay. The game introduces a stamina system that governs attacks and dodges, similar to From Software titles where perfect dodges completely recharge the bar. Personally, I see this as a conceptual error. Silent Hill was never about precise combat timing or get-good mechanics, but rather about vulnerability and despair. Dodges and counterattacks against stunned enemies can make combat more fluid, but they also turn Hinako into a more capable protagonist than she should be to maintain the essence of the franchise's horror. The context that she used to play like the boys and excelled in sports tries to justify her skills, but it still sounds forced for a Silent Hill game. The four-pillar system, stamina, sanity, health, and durability, is where Silent Hill F demonstrates the most ambition. The sanity mechanic is particularly interesting, functioning as a meter for Hinako's mental state that, when exhausted, causes continuous damage and disturbing visual effects, making the character slower. In my view, this is the most well-thought-out mechanic in the game, creating a feedback loop where the stress of combat literally harms your ability to continue fighting. The fact that special attacks consume sanity adds an interesting strategic layer. You can be more effective in combat, but at the cost of your mental stability. This captures well the psychological essence that should be at the center of any Silent Hill. Progression through the Sanctuary and Faith Point system represents a questionable modernization of classic mechanics. Players collect items throughout the environment that are converted into faith points at sanctuaries, which also serve as save points. With these points, it is possible to buy amulets or improve basic attributes like health, stamina, and sanity. Although functional, I think this light RPG system dilutes the feeling of helplessness that should permeate the experience. In classic Silent Hill games, you felt genuinely lost and with limited resources. Here, there is a numerical progression that can diminish that feeling of vulnerability. The sanctuaries scattered across the map also break the immersion a little, reminding you more of action game checkpoints than the organic atmosphere that the franchise has always prioritized. The two worlds mechanic has been intriguingly reinvented, replacing the classic transitions with the protagonist fainting. When Hinako has a blackout, she wakes up in different locations that incorporate elements of Japanese folklore and culture, creating completely surreal environments where the floor opens up, the walls start to pull you. I consider this one of the best conceptual adaptations of the game. Instead of the abrupt transitions between the normal world and the other world, we have something more organic and psychologically plausible. In these altered moments, the gameplay accelerates and becomes more aggressive, forcing the player to be more agile. It is a more subtle and mature approach to dealing with the reality-nightmare duality that has always been central to the franchise. Exploration and atmosphere, fortunately, seem to maintain the classic DNA of the series despite the mechanical changes. The game encourages a cautious approach where every detail of the scenery seems to carry a type of tension, forcing the player to walk slowly, not due to technical limitations, but due to the genuine fear of what might be lurking. The need to thoroughly search locations to find useful items maintains the survival horror aspect, and the fact that some encounters are more about racking your brain than about defeating that creature shows that not everything is resolved with brute force. In my opinion, this is the most promising part of the gameplay. When Silent Hill F focuses on tense exploration and oppressive atmosphere, it seems to understand what makes the franchise special, even with all the controversial changes in the combat system. The gameplay pace is deliberately calculated, forcing players to walk slowly not due to technical limitations, but out of pure terror. Every corner can hide a threat. Every shadow can materialize a trauma from the protagonist's past. The game balances moments of contemplative exploration with sudden bursts of action during transitions to the alternative world, where the pace accelerates drastically. The performance on PlayStation 5 was impeccable during testing, with no crashes or bugs. Honestly, I believe that Silent Hill F can redefine what we expect from a modern survival horror. The combination of strategic combat, narratively relevant puzzles, unique cultural atmosphere, and exceptional art direction creates an experience that honors the franchise's legacy while establishing a courageous new direction. The game seems to understand that true horror comes from vulnerability and loss of control, not from gratuitous violence or cheap scares. The graphical performance of Silent Hill F demonstrates exemplary optimization that manages to deliver high-quality visuals without compromising fluidity. On PlayStation 5, the game maintains a stable 60 FPS during gameplay, with cutscenes locked at 30 FPS, a technical choice that allows for greater cinematic detail in the narrative sequences. The implementation of motion blur in the cutscenes significantly increases immersion, creating a cinematic feel that complements the visual direction. According to Digital Foundry, the game impresses with the stability of its performance and the absence of stutters, common problems in titles developed on Unreal Engine 5. On PC, the implementation of DLSS allows even more modest hardware configurations to maintain a high-quality visual experience, demonstrating a genuine concern from the developers with the technical accessibility of the title. Personally, I consider that Silent Hill F represents one of the best examples of how to modernize the visual presentation of a classic franchise without losing its identity. The decision to maintain the visual essence of psychological horror while implementing modern rendering technologies results in an experience that is both nostalgic and contemporary. What impresses me most is how the developers managed to create their own visual language that honors the franchise, but establishes a unique identity through the Japanese setting. The graphical quality even surpasses Silent Hill 2 Remake in several aspects, demonstrating that smaller budgets can result in superior visual products when there is talent and dedication involved. The attention to cultural and historical details, combined with solid technical implementation, creates a visual experience that is genuinely terrifying and beautiful at the same time. It is a game that manages to be visually impactful without relying on exaggerated effects, proving that true graphical quality lies in artistic cohesion and refined technical execution. My honest recommendation is to wait at least a few weeks after launch before investing the $70 to $80 that the game is costing in pre-sale. Silent Hill F arrives on September 25th, 2025, that is, in a few days. But the first impressions from the specialized press raise some red flags that make me cautious about a day one purchase. The main problem I see is that Silent Hill F seems to have strayed too far from the essence of the franchise by focusing excessively on combat. The confrontations lack impact, and you are hitting an enemy for a long time without knowing if he is about to die or not. This is worrying for a series known for subtle psychological horror, not for prolonged brawls. The weapon durability system and Souls-like mechanics may work, but not necessarily in a Silent Hill game. On the other hand, the positive elements are really promising. The art direction seems impeccable, with the 1960s Japanese setting being praised for creating a strange but inviting atmosphere. The return of Akira Yamaoka for the soundtrack is a huge highlight, and the monster designs, although different, maintain that grotesque and disturbing feel characteristic of the franchise. The story with 5 different endings also promises good replayability. Konami is clearly trying to attract new players with a focus on action, but this could alienate classic fans, a situation that can generate both positive and negative content. My practical suggestion is to wait for the first week after launch to see how the public receives the game, especially the series' older fans. If the criticism of the combat is confirmed as a real problem that harms the experience, it's better to save the money. If, on the other hand, the community embraces the changes and the game manages to balance action with a horror atmosphere, then it's worth the investment. For those who are not a hardcore fan of the franchise, it can be a good entry point. For veterans, it might be better to wait to see if it really manages to capture the magic of the classics, or if it's just another mediocre spin-off with the Silent Hill brand. Well, that was the video. I hope you liked it and see you next time.
Good morning. That must have been some nightmare.
Nightmare? Thanks.
Shall we get going, Hinako? This way, Hinako.
scarecrow?